Alright, it is Thursday, July 12th. We're going on 10 o'clock in the morning. This is 2012. These are Estuarium's new friends, and we are at the Sands boat landing here in Port Royal with the rather noisy rig behind us right now. Hopefully they'll be leaving before long. We're here. This is our first part of our two-part combo tour this morning these folks are taking. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Granddad?
Oh, Dick Gates.
Jean Gates.
And the girls?
Eva Gates.
All right. And where's home to you two?
Dubai.
France.
Dubai.
Dubai.
And France.
Dubai and France. You have amazingly good English. We're going to be doing the program here at the Sands. So we'll be picking up parts of it for memories for these two, and we'll also be posting it on YouTube. So we'll be getting started here in a few moments.
Oh, you scared me. I can see it.
And these are live oysters.
This one.
All right, I want you to observe here this depression in the sand and mud right here. This is from a stingray that was up in here hunting for clams. Stingrays will use their gills. There's a clam. How about that?
Live one.
Yep, that is a live clam.
So they come up here during high tide and dig down like that?
Mm-hmm. They use their gills to make a blowing motion. It blows the sand and mud away to expose clams. Apparently the stingray, well, or that clam might have been too big for that stingray to handle. But yes, that's a live clam.
What do the stingrays do with the clam once they get them?
They have crushing teeth. Jake asked what they do when they catch them. They have crushing teeth. They are able to crush the clam to eat them. Okay, now what we are observing to our west of where we just found that clam, these are artificial oyster reefs. You see the pole right there with the sign on it. These artificial reefs were placed here by the Department of Natural Resources, the Oyster Restoration Project called SCORE. This was back, I think it was 2004 when it was done. And what you will observe is mesh bags. Here, the bags had oyster shell in it, and the oyster shell was intended to serve as substrate for baby oysters. We'll talk more about that in a couple of moments. So what we are looking at is artificial oyster rakes that were placed here by the Department of Natural Resources several years ago. Here you see the DNR signage, and it announces that these oysters are closed to harvesting. It's a community restoration program. The reason they're closed to harvesting is they are polluted. Oysters are filter feeders. We are near a municipality. All of the storm water in municipalities is piped directly into the rivers and creeks through their storm sewer system. And that water winds up in here in Battery Creek. And it is polluted primarily with pet waste. Here we see evidence of a tourist that was here fishing and obviously not aware of the area it was fishing in. So we have a little rig here. You all see this? This will go back and become part of the Estuarium's collection, meaning mine. Unfortunately, I never have time to go fishing anymore. All right. Where we are now is we're going to talk about oysters and their life cycle. These are live oysters, adults, and they're growing on a rather strange substrate. These are bread boxes that you see from the grocery store. Now, the story behind that. We mentioned the artificial oyster reefs that were done by the Department of Natural Resources. They have the reefs up there, and they also have reefs down here to the west. What we're looking at here is a series of experiments on oyster habitat, or establishing oyster habitat, that the estuarium partnered with the Port Royal Elementary School to do. Now, one of the reasons for oyster reef is reestablishing oyster reef habitat is, one, oyster reefs are habitat for many, many species other than oysters themselves. Lots of little animals spend, millions of animals, as a matter of fact. There are probably 1 million animals of way down to very tiny size living in just this little area that we're viewing right here. Oyster rakes or reefs are like cities. So, they provide habitat for other animals. They provide food for other animals. They also help keep the water clean. Now, our water, that doesn't look very clear, does it? Our water is turbid. And oftentimes tourists will say, "Ooh, your water's dirty." To which I reply, no, you don't understand. That is not dirt, that is life. It is a mixture of planktonic animals, and yes, some mud, and detritus. Detritus is decaying organic matter which came from the marsh grass, which is at the center of the food web. And it is also billions of tiny creatures beginning life. Another reason for these oyster rakes is to reestablish the marsh itself. Now, I'm going to get you all to turn around and look, and you can see the erosion, the wave erosion from being exposed right there. Now, if you will observe behind our little oyster rakes right here, what do you see behind them? See how the marsh has come back? The oyster reefs provide protection for the edge of the marsh itself, and what has happened in this area here is that the mud and sand that have collected behind the oyster reef have allowed for the reestablishment of the marsh grass itself. 5 years ago, this area here looked exactly like this area over here. And this is one of the test reefs that was done with the Port Royal L kids. That's been covered in previous videos. We're not going to go all the way into that right now, but this was another experiment. So what we're going to look for is, I want you to observe on these oysters. It would probably be easier to pick up a cluster, and what we're going to look for are baby oysters. They are called spat. Yep. If you look right, see where my finger is pointing right there? That is this year's oyster, baby oyster. And if you'll point to where that one is on the top of the shell, right there, there, you will see where one was but didn't survive. It was broken off. And if you look there, you see those little ones right there? Yeah, those are also this year. When oysters spawn, it's a simple release of sperm and egg into the water column. the eggs are fertilized just by floating around, and they begin a series of changes, molts, and changes larval form, go through 6 larval stages to the last form is called a spat. That's the little tiny oyster that you were looking at. And
What stage do they attach to the other shell?
excuse me?
What stage do they attach to the other shell?
It's at the spat stage.
Not until the test.
Yeah. The last of the stages that they have movement is they've already begun to develop a shell. They have tiny little cilia that gives them a certain amount of movement to propel themselves through the water. When they reach that spat stage, unless they land on a hard surface, they're pretty much doomed. If they land in sand or mud, they're going to be covered over and not survive. They need a hard surface, and they actually make a cement that cements themselves into place, and they begin growing their shell around that.
They're floating in the water around it all the time.
Yes. They're well, the tides can take them quite some distance as they're going through their larval stages. So an oyster may establish itself attached to another oyster or the bottom of somebody's boat or the pilings of a dock somewhere that can be quite some distance from where the eggs were released into the water. So yes, they're moved around quite a bit.
How long does it take them to go through all those things?
The larval stages they go through in a matter of weeks. I think it's 5 to 6 weeks. And what we have here are about 3 or 4 years. I'm looking on this. I'm looking at about 3 to 4 years of growth of the different size oysters. So you will have a mix of ages on any oyster cluster. So here we see someone was fishing and got hung up on this. As we look down to where the DNR oyster reefs were, I think those were put in 2006 or 7. They're gone now. They were essentially broken up by wave action. This oyster reef right here that you see is one that was put in by the estuarium with the kids from Port Royal L. It is still completely intact. The reason for that is, and this was an idea that we came up with after we saw DNR reefs beginning to break up. What they do is they take the oyster bags and they lay them down next to each other, and they were doing about 25 bags in length and 4 bags deep. We went, I think it's 10 or 12 wide and only 2 deep. What they would do is at the end of the rows, they would place rebar. All this oyster growth here is on a piece of rebar that is anchoring the edge of this reef. So they would use rebar to anchor the corner bag here, and then they connected all the bags together, one to each other. What we did was, rather than simply connecting the bags together, we ran another piece of rebar all the way through the front of each bag. You can actually see it right here. That's the rebar that each of these bags is connected to. This was put down in 2006 also. The reef that we put down in 2006 is still here. We have the good growth of marsh grass behind it, whereas the reefs established by DNR have broken apart and were much less successful as far as establishing growth behind. There were a number of other experiments that we did on following years to include the bread baskets here, or bread baskets there. And that one right there you see is where we actually use pallets, wooden pallets, and we put our oyster bags on top of the wooden pallets and put space between them, because what the youngsters had observed, as you see on the pillars here, is that oysters grow best on vertical surfaces. What was happening with the DNR reefs was a lot of the oysters were being smothered by mud that settled on top. So the kids observed that the oysters did very well on vertical surfaces. So when the bags were set up on the wooden pallets, we placed distance between each bag, which increased the amount of vertical surface, and it also decreased the number of bags needed. So it was less work and provided better habitat, better growing habitat for the baby oysters. That's pretty much going to do it for this section here. We're going to move down to another area on the shore, down to where we will eventually be looking for some shark's teeth. Alright, observe. I don't know how much mud is covering the oyster shell. I do know there's oyster shell underneath here. What you want to be careful of is, now I'm going to walk out here, and so I'm going down 3 or 4 inches in a couple of these. And you, Ava,
Yeah.
would not come back with your shoes
Right.
if you walked through that.
Yeah.
Because you have no ties on your shoes. You have ties on your shoes, but you don't even want to get your socks wet.
They're already wet.
They are now. So, when you see, this is called pluff mud. You don't, pluff, P-L-U-F-F. You don't ever want to walk out into pluff mud because there's no telling how deep it is. Now, you're never going to sink up to your neck and be stranded with the tides coming in and drown. That's not going to happen. But 50,000 years from now, archaeology students are going to be all over this area, and they're going to be finding shoe wear from this period and learning about us, all the different sneakers and all. Alright, now you will observe, yeah, you just saw the little fiddler crabs. Let me zoom in on these guys. And what's interesting about them, alright, it's the males that have the one large claw. And it's essentially, they are showing off.
And they raise it up in the air?
Yeah, my claw's bigger than your claw.
Oh, jeez.
They also use it to signal, come on over to my hole. The females have 2 small claws. I'm just not able to hold this camera steady enough here on the zoom, so we're not getting kind of a jumpy picture. Let's come back out. The females have 2 small claws. Now, here's something that you can do. I'm going to go around here. Well, they're right in front of us. I'm going to walk out here and stand in the midst of these guys. They have disappeared down in the hole. If you become motionless for 1 minute, you essentially become invisible. They have compound eyes. Compound eyes are good for detecting movement, but not so great for true vision. So you can walk out into the middle of a group of these animals. If you become still, within a minute, they're back up out of their holes and all around you as if you weren't even there. They'll be right at your feet, right at your toes. The question is, they have no hearing. I do not know that they would have what you might call hearing. I would say that underwater they are sensitive to vibration, which might be akin to hearing. They don't have what we would consider ears or an eardrum or anything. Let me pull back out here. That you might consider ears. Like, actually fish have ears, but these guys don't. So that's something you can try in the future, walking out. And now I'm stuck. I stood in one place long enough where I became anchored. So, yes, there's oyster shell beneath the mud. That's why I didn't sink up to the top of my boots. Now, back here, this area, I don't want to walk through that. I mean, I wouldn't lose my boots, but it would be a difficult slog to go through there. That is simply thicker. Where you want to walk is where we are now, where you see the good shell bottom. And that's going to allow us now to walk up behind this area, this infill of sand and mud from where the oyster rakes were. We can walk behind that. Here we have part, this is called the carapace. This is the top part of the shell. You can hold it, it's not going to hurt you. Top part of the shell of a stone crab that no doubt molted. Alright, here we are at the boat ramp, and you saw that when we got here, that truck that was hauling part of someone's, looked like the flotation from a dock that was being hauled out of the water. This is a type of sponge. That is a keyhole limpet right there. I will be taking these back to the estuarium to put in one of the tanks. I don't have a keyhole limpet right now. This I think is sea squirts. I'm not sure. We'll see when they open back up at the estuarium. So all of this stuff was attached. Let's see. Nope. Sea squirt. Sea squirts are, oh, look here, a little crab right here. A little crab that was living in the fouling organisms right now is doomed unless it goes into a tank at the estuarium. This is sponge. The yellow is what's called sulfur sponge. Don't squeeze it too hard. We'll put that in, and this little crab. So all of this stuff was what is known as fouling organisms that was living on the outside of that dock. And so the rest of what we see here is doomed to be bleached out by the sun. Okay, a couple more.
This thing hurts.
No, we didn't hurt. Here we have, there's a sea squirt right there. You can see the two, you can see the water in, whoops. One is water in, that's another, you point to them. That's, one of those is water in, the other is water out.
Oh.
That's a different type of sea squirt. We have that sea squirt there, and then we have the little yellowish one right there.
How far do they squirt water?
10, they can squirt water 8 to 10 inches. They, let me look what we got here, see. Go ahead and bring that little crab.
He kept jumping off.
Well, hold him in your hand.
But he doesn't want to come on my hand.
Pick him up.
Okay.
Alright, drop him in the bucket.
In the bucket.
Drop him in the bucket. Near that other stuff. There you go. Okay, you have just saved the life of a little mud crab. The interesting thing about sea squirts is that they are chordates. They preceded we vertebrates. So, our ancestors, the ancestors of all vertebrates, all animals with backbones, were chordates.
So that's what you used to look like? Sea squirt.
The sea squirt.
Yeah,
Sea squirt.
a number of generations back. All right, we're now on our way to the Sands Beach area from the top of the parking lot. And this area here, this is a an area where people who have oyster roasts through the year, through this fall, will be bringing their oyster shells that will eventually be put into bags and used as part of the oyster shell, part of the SCORE projects of rebuilding oyster reefs. So this is one of the collection areas that's found along the coast for that. This area here is what is known as the high marsh. The only time it gets water into it is on those extra high tides. Those tides that I was talking about when we first started, those are called spring tides on the new moon, full moon. And so the only time that this area gets water in it is on those spring tides. Now, what I want you to observe is this plant right here on the edge. This is called pickleweed. And you can eat pickleweed. You want a bite? No thanks. It's very salty. It's called pickleweed. You can, after you rinse it off, I would suggest that before you mix it into your salads. Also here, and if you will observe, let me go on zoom a little bit here. You'll observe some little tiny shells. Those are periwinkle snails. Periwinkle snails are found throughout the marsh. And a couple right here on the edge. Right there in the pickleweed. The periwinkle snails are one of the main food sources of diamondback terrapins, which we will talk about later.
What lives in the holes?
What lives in the holes? The question, those are fiddler crabs that live in the holes. Now you will observe the rack line up here in the marsh grass, just to show you where we are. When we look across the marsh, that over there, actually my house is over there. And when we pan, looking at the Beaufort River, again, Battery Creek, there's the boat landing. Now, on those spring tides, this little area here is full of water. There are spring tides where I'm standing right now, where we are standing. This can go underwater. And where all those folks are, and where those cars are now, that goes underwater. So you want to pay attention to your tides before you come down here and doze off. Alright, we'd been to the area that was the intertidal zone with cover. We see some to the east of us here, where we were a few minutes ago looking for shark's teeth. And so this is what is known as intertidal zone without cover. We don't have any of those rocks that have the oyster shell growing all over. So areas like this are relatively devoid of life, except beneath the sand. There's a lot going on. Tiny little creatures that we are not going to be able to observe, but we're into the microscopic, the meiofauna that are found in areas like this. When we go down just a bit, we're going to come to an area where, even though it's intertidal without cover, we're going to see there's a type of worm that lives down here. I don't see any in this area, but we'll go down and check some of those guys out. We have I tell you, it takes the eye. There's two little shark's teeth right here where we were in the intertidal zone without cover. What I'd like for you to do is, you will observe, if you'll look right here where I'm filming, you see those little black things?
Yeah.
Those are mud snails. Would you please collect those for me and put them in the bucket?
All of them?
Yep.
You too.
Well, there aren't any. That's good. Just drop those in the bucket. Those are going to be food for our sea star.